This time in the Magic Kitchen, we are sitting down with Fio Gede Parma.
I'm Leandra Whitwood.
And I'm Elyse Wells.
And welcome to the Magic Kitchen podcast, where we talk about magic, kitchen witchcraft, herbs,
and everything in between.
The Magic Kitchen podcast is fully and independently funded by the Witchwood Tea House. So show us some support and head over to thewitchwoodteahouse.com to purchase some deliciously hand-blended loose leaf teas or one of my other botanical products. As a special thank you for your support, please use POD15 at checkout to take 15% off of your next order. So without any further ado, let's get to the episode. Blessed be.
Fio Gede Parma is a Balinese-Australian non-binary witch, international teacher, and magical mentor. Fio is a co-founder of the Coven of the Wildwood and a midwife of the Wildwood Tradition. They have been initiated into 4 traditions of the craft and serve and celebrate as priestess and lover with many spirits and gods. Fio has authored or co-authored 6 previous books, including Elements of Magic and Magic of the Iron Pentacle. Today, we are talking about The Witch Belongs to the World, a Spell of Becoming. So thank you for joining us. We're really excited to have you here. This book, we were saying before we got started, is one of the rare, increasingly rare advanced witchcraft books out there. Right. We both really appreciated that you didn't go back to basics. You know, you have a really extensive appendix for people to fill out their knowledge with, but the meat of the book jumps right in. And I felt like it was a journey in shadow work just to I wasn't a reader, I was bearing witness. You know what I mean? Like it's so powerful. Like for folks listening who have read it, I'm sure they're going to be like, yep. For folks who haven't are probably like, what book is this? Like, and it's so mysterious. Like I loved this book.
Well, thank you so much. That makes me blush. And it certainly is what I wanted to do. Like, it is certainly, I have very rarely written books that are, actually, there's Elements of Magic, which is absolutely an introduction. But this book was the book I needed to write. I hadn't written a book alone, without a co-author in over 10 years when I started to write this manuscript in 2021. And a friend of mine, like a few months ago, was like, "This book is heavy because it's also heavy because it's full of photographic ink." Yeah. So it's heavy, and I really quite liked his appraisal of the situation.
Yeah, actually, that was like when I opened the box and like was taking out some other books, and this one, I was like, "Oh yes, like this is." It's a weighty read. And then you're reading it and you're like, oh, it's a weighty read.
Yeah.
I had it on my nightstand and I was, usually when I have a book on my nightstand, I can slide it off and just pick it up and read it. I'm like, whoa, wait, I forgot this one's heavy.
And the photographs are so
great.
Stunning. Yeah.
I have to thank my acquisitions editor for that, Alicia, because she, that was not my vision. That was her vision. She just said, "Hey, I've seen some of the photographs your friend Luke has taken over the years. We should have them in the book." And I was like, yes.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That was a great idea.
That's so cool. Yeah. I love that behind the scenes. Cause I was curious about that. It wasn't even like, I got so into like what you were writing about, but when I first picked it up, that was my question. Like, how do you even conceptualize putting this together that way? Because I feel like it's such a nice way to get to know you as we get to know you, I love this I'm showing, and for the listeners, they don't know, but the very first photo.
Yeah, you got to get the book to see
cover,
it.
Yeah, that's like my favorite. And then actually the final ones of you too, I really liked. And that one in the river. I don't know, I really
Yeah.
like them. I love photography.
Well, also the photographer is a Wildwood initiate and obviously a witch, and so I always let him take photos of me when I'm doing ritual. And so all of those photos they're not, I don't think even one of them is staged. Like he just is able to be around and just capture ritual in ways that are really profound. So he's captured some really amazing things of my beloveds as well, and some of my beloveds are in there.
Nice.
Yeah.
I loved that use of that term throughout the book when you spoke of the people in your inner circle magically and personally. Because I feel like, actually jumping right into it, you talk about the soul song. Is that the right use of that term? didn't
Yeah, I
write
talk
that
about
down.
soul story and story spell and spell song. Yeah, at the back. Yeah, at the end.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I had, I suppose it's the spell song, that moment when you're in a trance meditation, when you're connecting with deity, maybe somebody in the circles invoked a goddess. You know, that like energy current, this is gonna be hard to explain in words, but that
Yeah.
energy current when you're all there together.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And somehow each of you get your own wisdom from that moment.
Yeah.
Some of those moments I've had in ritual with others or just with myself and deity. It's not always in a bigger circle. But that's exactly the word I was missing, a spell song, because they give you
Yeah.
this line. There's been a few, literally a few, not like I could write them on a single page,
Yeah.
that have profoundly informed my craft
Yeah.
and will continue to.
Yeah. That's it.
I just loved it. This book gives people a vocabulary and a validity, I think, to what we are like. Well, how do I put that in words? And when I think you mentioned it took a long time for you to like really get this book out, and I can't
Yeah.
imagine trying to put words to a lot of this.
Yeah, I needed to go through some things as you do in life, and I started writing a very early draft of this book in 2017, and there were things that just needed to happen. 2017 was the year of my Saturn return, and that was full on. And I don't think I didn't have the perspective at the time to write this book in that year when there was so much upheaval in my life. Yeah.
And I think that's a good point. From the progression of the book and your experience is that witches are not this singular thing. We don't claim the word witch because we are the thing. We are this, and this is all we'll ever be. We are ever evolving. We're ever changing. We're ever developing ourselves. And that, through the shadow work, you say in here that witches are people of the hag. And that struck me. I'm like, yeah, absolutely. We are of the darkness. We are of the light. We are of the poison. We are of the healing.
Yeah.
And you can't be just one way on that path. If you're really going to have an in-depth experience and really connect with those divine entities that are also more than just one thing. I think that's profound.
Yeah, and for me, I have this deep passion about the history and folklore of the craft in its obviously in its diverse forms. And I think something that struck me very early on when I was studying as a little kid, because I got into it when I was 12, like it's I just started to really quickly see that there was like some sanitized versions of it. And I was like, oh, this isn't for me. Even as an adolescent, I was like, this isn't the witchcraft I'm looking for. And I couldn't put it into words at the time, but I would read anything. Like I would read anything at all that had the word witch on it, I'd read it. And so I read everything I could get my hands on, and I started to find my way through that. And of course, I met people like practitioners. And of course, if you practice the craft, you will encounter the spirits and the mysteries, and they will be your greatest challenges and your greatest teachers and initiators. And that's also why at the end of the book I have this I've never really liked the kind of debate around like self-initiation and like I guess what people would think of as initiation into lineages and traditions, which I have gone through and I do facilitate for people, but that to me is not the primary initiation. I feel like the primary initiation for the witch, obviously it will unfold for the rest of our lives, but it is that original kind of awakening to one's witchhood, and that will happen in multiple ways, but usually there are forces, powers, spirits, ancestors who come and they wake you up, and sometimes it's terrifying, and at the same time it can be enlivening and wondrous and beautiful and all of these things, usually all of the above, right? And I wanted there to be some ritual container full of resin and texture that would create a space for someone who is very serious about doing this to take themselves through the ritual or adapt it to what they needed it to be. But if they effectively do the thing, then the powers of witchcraft will come, and if they come, then they'll initiate you if you're willing. So this whole book is a spell that leads you to that gate, and I view it, and I say it in the book, like you can claim to be an initiated witch. You can't claim to be an initiated Gardnerian or an initiated Wildwood witch or initiated reclaim. You can't claim those things, but you can claim to be an initiated witch, and no one can tell you otherwise, because if the powers of the craft come to you, this is also obvious to witches. Like there are many witches I've met who, like, who have never been brought into a coven or lineage, and they're so strong and skilled and so marked as a witch. And these are, it's rubbish to not consider them as witches. I think we've gotten to the point in the witchy world, where we know this now. We know this. But there was a time where this was just, even like, I'm quite young, but even for me, like 25 years ago when I started getting into it, there was a time where these debates were so strong and so vitriolic. This whole like, you must be in a tradition, you must be in a particular kind of coven, and it's just like, witches are witches are witches. That's all. Like,
right. I was immersed in that growing up as a witch. But you're talking about like that whole spirit coming to you and transforming you and helping you on your path, and that is, I think, part of what gets missed by a lot of self-initiates, is they're not immersed in that enough.
Yes.
And Elyse and I have talked back and forth about like the idea that a coven isn't necessary, but it's definitely helpful.
Oh,
but
so helpful.
Having your allies is also helpful. My specialty is working with plants. And one instance I can remember is meeting belladonna. She's terrifying. She can kill you. But if you meet her in the right way, with the right intention, with the right mindset, under the right conditions, then she transforms you. She shows your shadow to you and helps you evolve. And I think that is such a powerful and profound path to take.
Yeah. I think covens have helped me immeasurably. I have, they are hot houses of growth, and they propel you and amplify. But at the same time, you can get sucked into human bullshit. Like, so it comes with pros and cons, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But it is true that I do think a lot of those like the idea of self-initiation or self-dedication, obviously I think it's clear, but yeah, if one is not immersed in the current, then the current probably won't rise. But sometimes it does, and then it slaps you in the face, and then you have to deal with it for the rest of your life.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think the coven aspect, they help you process that. They help you pull through it. And it doesn't have to be a formal coven either. But like you have been initiated in 3 traditions, correct? Am I remembering that right? Yeah. Okay. So you understand that Acutely, I love it.
Yeah. Yeah, not always in a coven sense, but definitely in a teacher, like with a teacher, like another human teacher, because not every tradition I've been brought into is coven based. So as long as another living human mentor who is more experienced than you in the craft or in spirit work or whatever, I think that is definitely a great idea. Absolutely. If you, I mean, I sort it out myself, but all my teachers at the end of the day, they would still point me back to my practice, my spirits, my magical relationships. And yes, they gave me all kinds of amazing tools and techniques and lore and mystery, but I at the end of the day had to utilize them, and I at the end of the day have to figure out how this works for me.
Definitely.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's a good teacher, really, because we don't like we've talked too about like the many words that we can use as a teacher. We can be a priestess, priestess, we can be a mentor, we can be I dislike this word myself, but coach. We can be
Yeah.
it freaks me out. I don't like that word.
Yeah, I don't like
We could
it.
be a guide,
Yeah.
like there's so many words that have so much different meaning. But at the end of the day, for me, it's like I also don't like the word like client. Like when I speak about like someone I read tarot for or something, like it sounds so capitalist and like
Sure.
cold,
Yeah.
but the people that we touch,
Yeah.
emotionally and spiritually with what we know, the proverbial we, all of us
Yeah.
in the craft,
Yeah.
like that helps us solidify what we know as well. Like that relationship with students it's mutually beneficial
Yeah.
to what we can do.
The ritual is going well. The candle took flame at exactly the right moment. You said all the words perfectly, and you've placed your offerings on the altar. But nothing's happening. Or is it? How do you know it's working? What am I supposed to feel? The most important part of magic is raising energy, and yet it's not always clear how to do it, or even what it is. If raising energy intimidates, confuses, or even scares you, but you know you want to do it right, join me October 24th for the Spiral Path. I'll be teaching my own preferred method of raising energy, the Spiral Path, as well as walking you through the other types of energy you can raise. If you are ready to build trust with energy, this workshop is for you. Get your tickets at seekingnuminate.com/events or by following the link in the show notes.
I wanted to ask you a bit about the Wildwood tradition because I was unfamiliar with it before reading your book, but it just tugged at a lot of my heartstrings, especially Inanna's my patron deity for over 10 years now. So there's like that at this little foundation to it in a way, like as you formed a lot of the chapters, you spoke on Inanna a bit, and it helped me instantly connect to everything you were saying, actually. But then also the Wildwood tradition felt familiar, but also so different. Could you just kind of tell our listeners a little bit about it?
Yeah, it becomes harder and harder to talk about in some ways. So because I was there at the beginning of its emergence, and so it's kind of complex. So how to talk about this? I was present for the founding of the Coven of the Wildwood, and we were a group of witches who came together at an appointed time in a really fateful way that is hard to like. I mean, we all know what it means to have gravitas in life and to have something intensely synchronous and fateful that it is almost shocking. So, like, your version of that, transplant that. So, like, truly, this was a time of so much immense synchronicity and fatefulness and intensity that it was like living in a movie. Like, it was a bit intense. And so that was around that formation of that coven. And then in the first year of being in that coven, we encountered and we didn't consciously mean for this to happen either. We encountered an entire coherent stream of witchery. And it was completely passed to us by the spirits. What was then interesting was that I started publishing books and traveling, and I started meeting a lot of witches of old orders, of traditional orders. And little tiny things I'd say in a class I'd teach, or they would talk to me later. They would be like, that thing you said about the Wildwood, it's actually quite old. Let me tell you how. And so I had that happen a lot. And then I met another witch down here in so-called Australia where I live, who's part of another tradition. And we ended up cross-pollinating across teaching each other because our traditions were so weirdly parallel in ways that weren't possible. But yeah, so the Wildwood tradition is also like it to those of us who are in it, it is as ancient as the stars and as new as the newest shoot, right? Um, for me, it's my home tradition. It's how I think and perceive witchcraft. Like that's why it's laced in all my writing. It's hard for me to almost divorce Wildwood from witchcraft as I know it. But at the center of the Wildwood, we have four great spirits, and they're these ancient witching gods. And look, I do believe that other witches can commune with them. Otherwise, I wouldn't have included prayers to them in this book. um, but that we do pass secret lore and names about who they are when you're initiated, and that obviously weaves you into the tradition. But that's kind of really only relevant to the people who are in the tradition. But it's a very it's a very like those of us who formed that coven, we formed it in a particular way with particular rites and particular ways of doing things that developed over time, and that were deeply impacted by intimate relationship with other witches of private mystery tradition. And so it's kind of like that's almost all I can say about it, because it's kind of to say any more would be to talk about like very, very intimate things. Um, back in the day, I'm also an initiate of traditions like Anderson Fairy, which has its roots in the 1930s, right? Back in the day, witches used to they used to share a lot more than they the boundaries of traditions have gotten more rigid over time. And but back in the day, witches would be like they'd meet another initiate of the craft, and they'd go, "Oh, what's this?" And they'd actually share a lot more than you'd think. And certainly in the traditional craft outside of Gardnerian and Alexandrian lineages, although they also share and have shared with all kinds of other orders, a lot of traditional witches, if they identify that you are one of the craft, they'll share. We'll share with each other. There are certain kind of oaths, but we'll share with each other. So it's kind of like all of that is complex. But and the Wildwood tradition is deeply poetic. Like anyone who becomes stewed in its mysteries. I've noticed very recently a Brazilian student who isn't my direct student, but who I know them. I saw them writing poetry about one of our gods, and I was like, oh wow, like I've known this person for a few years, and I just have watched their poetry explode since they started studying the Wildwood tradition. So it's a deeply poetic tradition that kind of like gets into you, which is good because witchcraft has to get into you.
Has to plant those roots.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Hard to talk about when it's your own, like in a way when it's your own history as well. Like it's kind of hard for me to pull it all apart.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and I like how you said it's really just the lens you see the craft through, and therefore, it's almost the lens I feel the same way about my tradition. Like my high priestess, she was initiated by Ryan Foxwood, who you quote in here, and you quote Lady Cersei, which, it's that same lineage. So I felt a nice sense of kinship with that. But at this point, like my high priestess, she's very, secretive. She doesn't even like to share our coven name, which is why I never say it. But we use the spiral as our, like, if there's a symbol for what we do, that's how we conceptualize the world and time. And what is the world and what we do, but time and energy. That's all we have and all we can do. So we're always like, that's how I, like, when people are like, well, what is the eclectic fairy tradition, which is what we call our tradition now, since it's kind of divulged a little bit from fairy. And it's like, well, it's a framework. It's not really like, it's so personal. Like anybody initiated by my high priestess or even by Orion are going to have their own approach to the way they run their coven. And that's going to become its own like micro culture.
Sure. Yeah.
I think that's something that's hard to convey to people who are outside of a tradition, because even if you read, like religiously read books by a certain author who's of a certain tradition, you're not in the room, like
No.
I feel like that is something group ritual. And you talk about reclaiming too, which we talk about a lot. Leandra and I both did a lot with reclaiming in our past. It's just, there's so many ways to involve yourself in witchcraft with other people that
Oh, sorry, you keep going.
Well, it's just good. Like it's nice to have somebody on who's initiated in things and can talk to like this variety of traditions out there.
Yeah, there is a variety. Hey, I have always been deeply fascinated by all witchcraft, right? Like I'm very intellectually fascinated by many things, including, Wiccan history. Obviously, many traditions are deeply influenced or somewhat influenced by at least Wiccan concepts or Wiccan terminology, as am I. But I'm not a Wiccan and I don't really have an emotional desire to pursue that. But I am intellectually fascinated by that. And I have a lot of some of my own initiates are Gardnerians and Alexandrians as well. But I have a great deal of respect for traditions, for non-traditions. I think about traditions a lot. And because I'm in them and I'm like kind of teaching and initiating people and working the mysteries. And then even that phrase, when I say working the mysteries, that's such a thing that someone in a tradition would say. And I feel like what I was trying to do with The Witch Belongs to the World was convey the poetic gravitas and emotional intensity of what it is to be like a witch, who happens to be in like initiatory traditions, and try to be like, here's the guts of it. Go ahead and touch the craft, because actually a tradition of witchcraft, you don't need it. It can be, for me, I actually did need it, but I know that you don't need it. Like I know that you can practice the craft and be a witch and be the witch and be witchcraft without ever, like, traditions are so modern. Like when we think about like the witch trial records, and the what we can kind of infer from the study of like witch trial folklore kind of material, like what Emma Wilby does and Owen Davies does, we can look at the past and what we can kind of see is that there were definitely folk magics and bioregional animisms that were syncretized with Catholicism or Protestantism, that had a whole dual faith thing going on, but people were still having experiences with the spirits, whether or not they identified as Christian is, whatever, is irrelevant. And so, the spirits would come to these people like Isabel Gowdy, and they would initiate the witches. So again, it comes back to that idea of like a witch is a person who is contacted by the spirits and who is kind of catalyzed and awoken to the possibility of sorcery and spirit flight, and going to the Sabbat, or at least having an ecstatic communion with the gods, or the land, being able to heal, being able to curse, all of these things. Like I don't want to throw anything out. Like I teach cursing, and I teach cursing publicly and in covens, because I think that if you want to I think there are a lot of people out there who are really hungry for knowledge, and I know they're going to try to curse anyway. So I'd rather them have the ethos and the framework and really solid filtering techniques, and also and also some strong lore and mythos to give them an understanding of what they're even doing and whether or not they want to do it. So I feel I teach a lot of things that a lot of witches would never teach in workshop form, and one of the reasons I do that is because I want to help the many people out there who are practicing tradition or no tradition. I want to give them tools and techniques that work and that are solid, and that are tried and tested. And what's interesting to me is that I've had many people come to my workshops over the past 15 years who have been in the craft for decades and in traditions. And they'll say to me, wow, no one ever taught me how to do any of that. Because there's a lot of, like, in some of the traditions, there's not a lot of tech. Like, it's like, you'll figure it out. And so something that I've really worked hard on is like developing tech from practice and folklore that is workable.
Oh, that's such a good point.
Yeah.
Because I remember, when I was starting out, everybody would talk about those mysteries, women's mysteries, goddess mysteries. I'm like, what the hell are all these mysteries? And nobody was really speaking about them. And I think that is it's an important aspect to shine light on those, to rise up that path so people can actually walk it and understand what it is instead of fumbling in the dark. And that's how I felt when I first started. And I think that's why I teach, why I offer as much knowledge as I can to my students, because I don't want people fumbling in the dark anymore. And I find that happens so often. And then we get frustrated and we stop, right? We can't do something when we think we're failing at it constantly, or we can't succeed at something if we're not given adequate instruction or information.
Yeah.
Hey there, witches. Did you know that there's an entire community out there dedicated to you and your journey? The Rebel Mystic community is a space where I offer my decades of knowledge and experience to witches just like you. I do this through live events, monthly mentoring, monthly rituals, a book club, and other resources like workbook pages and meditations. There is even a complete self-paced course library you can access. Check the link in the show notes to learn more about this community and how to become a member. Blessed be.
Within this, I'm thinking more and more about what you're saying on the ways we're initiated by spirits, by simply our connection to spirits, by first our acknowledgement. Like, my broken record, like, catchphrase is witchcraft is 90% acknowledgement. Like, until you can acknowledge it's happening, you can't do that magic. And it's really just that 10% to meet spirit that we have to really do ourselves. And once we are open to it. And I've realized as you're talking that, yes, I've been initiated in a coven, but also my first initiation came with my experiences with land spirits as a child, which now I consciously share that land spirits are the basis of my practice. They're like what it all comes down to for me. It's kind of my lens of when I'm doing the magic, that's where it starts.
Yeah.
But I have to say, like, when I really think about it, it was like I was like 4, 5, 6 years old when I was like making my first potions in the woods and asking the trees what I should add. And I literally remember asking our trees by the house I grew up in if I could eat this. And it turned out it was watercress. And I asked the trees, I said, can I eat this? It looks so delicious.
Yeah.
I'm a Taurus, if you can't tell. Yeah. And they're like, yeah, you can. So I'm eating it. And my mom comes out and she's like, what are you doing? I mean, I was like 3, 4 years old. And I'm like, no. The trees said it's okay. Like, I can eat this. She's like, oh, I don't know. And my neighbor was over, and I grew up in Amish country, Pennsylvania. So everybody was into nature out there. And she's like, oh yeah, it's watercress. She can eat that. And I was like, I told you, like, I had no doubt that the trees had guided me to this, but I feel like I love your subtitle to this book, A Spell of Becoming, because it speaks to this reclaiming of what we already know, becoming what we already are.
Yeah.
Just remembering those experiences and that trust we had with spirit and the land to do something with it, to let it be our path, to really be permissive in that.
Yeah. Yeah, and to become what we most desire as well. Like lately I've been interviewed on some podcasts that aren't about like that aren't, like I love coming to these podcasts that are like other spirit workers and witches because we can talk shop, right? But like lately I've been on these like other podcasts, like I was on Ologies and a few others that are very not witchy, right? And so I've been like talking more again about kind of broader things, historical things, things that anyone could like understand. But something that I've been saying to people lately, which I believe is true for me at the moment, is that, if you are sitting there, because people always go, how do you know if you're a witch? And I'm like, if you're sitting there for years and one of the main things in your life that you think about and want to do and obsess about and read about and secretly do in the corner is witchcraft, then you're probably a witch. That's probably the clue that you are a witch. Like if you can't help but think about it every day and like try things out and like, but because there are so many people who are so nervous and so freaked out about doing the wrong thing, whether that's fucking up magically or actually disrespecting established witches. Recently I was conversing with these two lovely people from Two Girls One Ghost, which is a lovely, amazing podcast, and they were saying, oh, we're just really we don't want to claim witch because we're worried we'll disrespect actual witches, and I was like, that's so beautiful. And I said, that's such a beautiful, earnest thing to say. But if you're thinking about it and doing witchy things and you're consistently doing that for years, you're probably a witch.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's true. I feel like we're in like the third wave feminism equivalent of witchcraft right now.
Yes.
Like second wave was all about like let's be as much like the church as possible.
Oh,
like there was always that comparison. Now we're beyond that. And we're like, no, just claim it.
Yeah. Exactly. And maybe we're back where it began, which was, like maybe these people, like I actually do believe that some of the people who we think of now as witches and who are accused of as witches, not all of them and probably not most of them, but I think some of them would have become so like, well, I am fucking outcast and they keep calling me a witch. What if I am a witch? And then they start acting out certain things that they hear that witches do, like myths or tropes or legends in their region. Maybe they go to places at midnight where witches are said to go, and maybe they have an experience. Because the thing is, this happened and still happens in India with the medieval rise of Tantra, which was completely transgressive and broke the social order of mainstream Hinduism at the time, and was a huge liberation to women. Traditional Tantra is like very liberating for women. And what do? A lot of them go to the cremation grounds at midnight and call upon really transgressive gods and do magic with each other in groups naked. This is history. No one denies it and no one pretends it was not happening. So again, it's no shock to me that there would be groups of people or individuals who would be drawn out and having either shamanistic, spirit flight experiences or, like trying shit on and doing weird things. Because, they were also deeply oppressed. Like the early modern period of witchcraft, persecution, most people were deeply oppressed and deeply under it was like serfdom and women had no fucking autonomy. And like, what do you have then? You have witchcraft.
Hell yeah.
Well, and it's the same today, really. Like, there's no coincidence. It is not a coincidence that COVID saw an incredible rise in witchcraft.
Yeah.
It's been wild to watch. Like, even 5 years ago, this conversation would have less mass appeal than it would today. Like
That's totally true.
there's people it's amazing. Like there's people that I'll connect with on social media or listeners of the podcast. They're like, yeah, I didn't even know about this 3 years ago. Like,
Yeah.
and it's that closeness with death. You know, death is like this most spiritual experience we have. We have
Yes.
birth, we have death, we have the sex in between.
Mm.
And when we look at what COVID sort of reminded everybody about, that Western civilization forgot about, which is that death is right there all the time. And that's nothing to be afraid of. In fact, it can be empowering to turn and face it.
Yeah.
What better way to do that than spirituality? And in the West, I feel like the so-called West has a deeper need for it. And that's also why I think we're seeing that grow. Like even here in Greece, the church is wildly oppressive, wildly. I mean, like you just can't use the word witch in a serious way here and get away with it. It's explicitly illegal, but in the EU it's not. So like, sure, their chance of persecuting you might be fairly low, but you'll get fired. You know, your landlord will kick you out. Like there's very real threats for people who identify as witches here. And I know in like the subcontinent of Asia, it is no different. It's actually in a lot of ways, it can be worse.
Yeah, people are still killed. People are still killed for the accusation of malevolent sorcery and witchcraft. It still happens, and I wish Western witches would think about that more a little bit, because there are people in African nations, Papua, yes, India, and Bangladesh and Pakistan, and women are set on fire and killed.
Yeah.
You know, and
acid is thrown. And I was in India in 2022. It sounds like so long ago, but it feels like yesterday. And I visited in Agra, which is like the most Muslim part of, it's one of the more Muslim cities in India, for those listening. They have a pervasive issue with women having acid thrown on them by men who weren't granted dowries to marry them, or it's I mean, it's like insane, the reasons that these women are persecuted. And the West just like don't know. Like I just don't. It's something I try to reconcile, but I've not had good luck with in my head. I don't even know how to like start these conversations in a more public way for the West to embrace, but also understand the differences of, you know, what witch means around the world.
It's why I will never it's why I have a strong conviction that when I define witch, because I'm Saturn ruled. I'm very Saturnian, and I define and describe witch in a very particular way. So there are two things. Like, I don't think a witch is just anyone who does magic. That's not my definition. It can be someone else's, and that's fine. I'm not going to fight you. But if someone asks me, I'm going to say that a witch is, you know, is a transgressive, ecstatic spirit worker who is usually in some way undermining empire. Because even in pre-Christian times, in the city of Rome, in certain Germanic cultures, in Greece, in various parts of Greece, witches, or people who we would now connect to witches, like sorceresses and seers, were often they were either beloved or they were rejected. Like before the advent of Christianity, Rome completely expelled all of the soothsayers and witches and wizards from their city. This was before Christianity. This is pagan Rome. So witches, you know, and Odin strikes witches out of the sky. Like we have this, like, it's not just Christians or Muslims or Jews who fear witches, or Hindus for that matter, or Buddhists. It is actually also pagans. And so we have to remember that witches are, that's why I say that we are of the hag, because we are of the chthonic primal root of things. And yes, we're darkness and light, we're all of it, but that scares the shit out of people. You know, we carry the other world with us. Witches don't bow down to the gods. We can petition the gods just like a pagan or a Christian, but we also know how to go directly to the gods and demand things, you know, and speak almost as if we were a god. You know, there's also lore that shows us that gods are scared of witches. so 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 that's a big deal. That's a big deal. We're not just folk magic practitioners. We do folk magic, hopefully. I hope most witches do folk magic. We're a little bit more than that. And that's why we're never going to be witches are never going to be truly able to be mainstream in capitalist imperialist societies. We're completely we're anathema to that. So we also have to be mindful of that legacy. We have to be really mindful of that because that's who we've always been on some level. You know, we've always been heretics. We've always been devil worshippers, like, and by which I mean either the witch's devil or you're worshipping devils. You know, you're worshipping gods that are devils to us. You know, right?
Right. I mean, you even speak in your book about daemons and demons and
absolutely.
And King James, you know, you quote him that Bible in here, and you know, he always struck me as that one that acutely feared witches for a good reason. Perhaps. He had history there, perceived
deeply
history.
Feared witches, yeah.
But yeah, you're right. Like we are that primordial force. We are that churning, that sea of milk that is unpredictable, and that's what I love about this path. And it's hard to convey that to brand new witches, I think, because of that fear aspect, that fear mongering that has happened through the centuries. And we are in that soup. We are the movers and shakers. We are on the fringe. We are the fringe. And that gets me going. I'm doing my little happy dance.
Yeah, it's why queers and trans people and other forms of folk who have been demonized continuously, like women and femme people and brown people and black people and refugees and disabled people, like this is why we always have a home in the craft. It infuriates me when I read things from the revival period of witchcraft in Britain that says weird shit like, oh, we will never have, you know, back then they said weird shit like, oh, you know, you must, gay people can't be in witches. Like it's all there. You can't deny it. Like, the people who are disabled can't be witches. Like people said that shit. Oh,
my favorite is
elders.
My favorite ever is like the Gardnerian thing that made Valiente leave was like, I can't remember the exact quote, but when a high priestess reaches an age, she will step down for a more beautiful, youthful priestess.
Yeah, good on you, Gardner. Nice inventing of bullshit there.
Yeah. Totally. Love it. I picture him standing there with like his like red pen still on his hand, and he's like, I don't know, it just appeared in the book. It's not from me.
Yeah,
this is the gods.
I'm quite sure that most Gardnerians have forsaken those Ardanes, but.
Yes,
they did exist. I think they were taken quite seriously by many covens for quite a long time.
Yeah, some still do, and it baffles me because I would like to hope that we would evolve beyond that. That's our progress here. That's our purpose here, is to evolve beyond that, and to recognize that we are one. You mentioned that, you know, witches call upon the gods and go directly to the gods to demand from the gods. But I also view us as we are the gods.
Yes,
and if we can't grow up, what are we doing?
I think that's why the gods respect people who act like they're divine. You know, and that's an ancient form of magic. You know, theurgy is an ancient form of magic where you identify as the gods. You invoke them, you become them, and then the gods listen. And again, this link, like I'm kind of obsessed with Tantra at the moment, and it's, you know, it's also a big part of my father's tradition, and so I've been thinking about it a lot lately as well. And yeah, in Tantra it's the same. You become like a god, you act like a transgressive, chthonic, intense, freaky god, so that you can kind of become like them, and kind of have have that power of the cosmos, that Shakti move through you.
Oh man, I wish we could just do a whole episode on Tantra right now. That's something I have not delved into like I would like to. I feel like because I'm of your mind that I like the intellectual exploration of witchcraft.
Yeah.
I did my master's degree in witchcraft by building out a personal study of like 1880 to present, just kind of charting what we can definitely call witchcraft in the
Mm.
sense that like these were witches who called themselves witches, you know, because there's like this wide dearth of like, sure, we have some writing from Athens in like 400 BC, but even what we think we know of ancient Greece is so limited. And we
Yeah.
kind of neglect the fact that we do have a solid record of the past 70 to 100 years,
Mm.
120 perhaps, if we want to
Mm.
include people like Helena Blavatsky and um, OTO and Thelema and those roots that maybe those folks didn't call themselves witches, but they definitely influenced later ones. Like
Sure.
there's
Yeah.
just so much to that. And I think the next wave of academic witches, like wanderings and wanderings, are going to look a lot like trying to understand why those traditions of the early 20th century, they just kind of took willy-nilly from Eastern spirituality. And like it was pretty non-discriminate, and they weren't afraid to say it's ours. And like I've literally read texts from Wiccan teachings, not like Wiccan initiate things, but like people
Sure.
who were initiated in Wicca. They will say that the chakras are Wiccan. Like they have no qualms about it, and it honestly sometimes comes across that they're not aware that they are not in fact
Yeah.
originally British, for
Yeah.
example.
Or they'll say weird. I mean, the reality is, I think we know one of the major reasons, people involved in Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn were very independently moneyed. Many of them, not all of them. And, like Aleister Crowley was, Gardner was not in the Golden Dawn as far as we know, but he was, he was a literal, what was he? He was working in British colonial plantations. Like, you know, that's the reality. Like these people were steeped in colonial thinking. And when I read Gardner's work, he seems to respect all the distinctions, and I think he would have known that chakras are Buddhist and Hindu, absolutely. But yeah, there are Wiccan and non-Wiccan authors and many eclectic witch type people who write about chakras as if they bloomed in the middle of Poland or something. But
Yeah,
but it's like,
strange.
yeah, it's weird. It's like I just revised, I have a book coming out this year through Crossed Crow Books, which is a revised edition of a book of mine that came out through Llewellyn originally in 2012 called Ecstatic Witchcraft. And in the book, I talk a lot about shamanic witchcraft, and I don't leave that behind. Like I'm still like in that book originally, I was contextualizing a lot of like what like the idea of academic anthropological shamanism was, as decontextualized from Siberia and Tungus speaking peoples, but then how it was placed over here and here and here, and also how people from my father's island and people from Brazil and people from India and people from Philippines, whatever, far away from there, the original Tungus or Evenk peoples, like how they use that word shaman because it has kind of moved, and how indigenous peoples will use terms like totem or shaman kind of casually in a way sometimes to try to get across an idea or a concept. But and in a similar way, there is movement of culture. There's cultural movement, but I guess the difference with what you're talking about was that they were just like doing whatever the fuck they want and weren't always considering the impact of what they were doing. And Blavatsky was like that a bit. She was like,
Oh
the
yeah.
hidden chiefs are on the top of a mountain somewhere in the mystical Far East. It's like, wow, that is just a load of crap. Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
Skim descent of Anana, and you're like, oh, lapis lazuli eggs were
Yeah.
like they extrapolated on little nuggets. And yeah, I'm excited to see where the fact that we've got more witches involved in witchcraft these days, I think has to always be a good thing. No matter how they're coming to the craft or even how far in they'll go. Like, I think we're going to see a shift of more academic witches studying witchcraft, whether that's in anthropology, archaeology, just literarily.
Yeah.
Because that right now has been like a major disconnect, is like really trying to understand the source of what we do in some cases. And then also applying that to, new knowledge. Like that's one of the big issues in Greece I face all the time with archaeology is you'll go to a site and the church, literally, this is not exaggerated, the church approves museum exhibits. So if you go to Hades's temple at Eleusis, like where the mysteries were performed, it doesn't allude to the mysteries, and like it kind of like couches it in like a very like generic, almost boring, like just keep walking kind of way. Like you have to always be digging deeper to apply what we know. And that's like a pretty general, academics should know that too, that the mysteries happened and, for thousands of years, but we still don't always see it combined. I'm excited for that next generation.
Yeah. And of course there's, I did when you first reached out to me to be on this podcast, I like looked you up and I was like, oh, you've done a master's in witchcraft, and Leandra's teaching this, that, and the other with plant magic. Like I do that. I always look people up. But
awesome. I'm so glad you did.
Yeah. Well, I have to. I feel like I have to. But like what I think is interesting is that, yeah, you're right, that there are witches who are becoming, who are also scholars. Like I have a scholarly mindset, but I'm not like a trained scholar in any way. But I'm always like thinking about things like this. Mainly, I'm concerned, of course, with the practice of the craft, but I feel like my concern with the practice of the craft and the passing of it necessitates for me a study of history, a study of folklore. I can't, like, the way I work, the way my brain works won't let me not do it.
Me too. I think I was a difficult initiate, at least in the beginning, because my high priestess and my mentor in our coven would be like, yeah, so we do this. I'm like, why? Like I was that like 4-year-old in the backseat, like, why? Okay, why? Okay, but why? So it ended up being like an exploration for all of us. Like even now, my high priestess will message me with something. She's like, I found this the other day and I thought of how you would approach it and I decided to research it and blah, blah. It's just like the rabbit holes that we can go down when we want to understand more deeply why we do what we do. It always leads us to the academic, I think. Yeah.
And then the academic, I think, for a lot of us, like, leads us right back into the ecstatic.
Yes. Oh, yeah.
Definitely.
I've been going on a rabbit hole lately of like standing stones and, because we've seen you can make your own in your backyard and really enjoy it. You can do incredible things with a brand new, megalith. But then there's the ancient ones and they all have their own sort of energy. And I was reading an article recently about how it's like a chicken and the egg thing. Do we know if a sacred site was there because the ancients felt a presence and then said, okay, well, let's build it here? Or did they build it there and then impose that egregore by their actions? Probably both. But, you still can kind of experience something special when you go to Hecate's cave, for example, in Eleusis, and experience that, like, that tug to your shadow. Like your shadow is like more alive there versus like the Temple of Artemis. You're like want to roll down hills. It's like a different spiritual. It's ecstatic. That's the word.
Yeah, and if you're invoking these gods who I know to be real, then of course they're going to be there. So yeah.
We read a lot of great books for the Magic Kitchen podcast, and Leandra and I thought it was high time to invite you to read along with us. Join Leandra and I in the Wheel of the Year book club, where every 6 weeks we meet to discuss a book together. The first meeting will be around Samhain. Join by joining the Magic Kitchen Pantry, either through the Rebel Mystic community or through patreon.com/ElyseWells at the Dedicate or Initiate tiers. We cannot wait to read with you.
So, Fio, tell us how our listeners can find you and how they can connect with you.
Yeah, I mean, so I have a website, fiogedeparma.com, and my Instagram is the same name, and I do a lot of teaching. So like I'm constantly offering various courses and classes either in person wherever I am. I go to the States and I teach there too, sometimes Europe, sometimes Brazil, but a lot of my classes are on Zoom. So I do that. So if people want to interact in that way, some of my classes, over half of them do have prerequisites. Some of them include like we already have to have met at a workshop or a witch camp or an event, or we have to know each other through someone else, or you have to have taken elements of magic in the case of like how I teach in reclaiming. Depends what stream I'm teaching in, right? Because there's a few different streams. But yeah, like, and then also I read tarot and do mediumship and all of that jazz that witches do. Yeah, like, I'm a working witch. It's my whole life in that, even in a professional sense. It's all I do. Which has its challenges and its blessings, of course. But yeah, I'm around.
Well,
Thank
thank
you
you.
very
We'll
much.
put those links in the show notes for everybody too.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. What
Yeah,
a joy.
thank you for coming. This was great. Like, this was a wonderful episode. I love the deeper ones. I love the more, not trivial. That's not the right word, but that's the only thing that's coming to my mind, because my mind, it's like early.
Yeah, like lighthearted. You mean like lighthearted?
Yeah, they're more lighthearted. They're more easily digestible.
I've got a Scorpio moon. I just go straight down.
Into it. Got it. I like that though. I love these, the ones that scramble your brain and make you think, that shake things up, that make you reevaluate. I love those conversations. I really do.
Yeah, it's just me. I can't help it. Yeah.
Merry meet,
Merry part, and merry meet again.
Thank you for joining us on the Magic Kitchen podcast. Please visit my website, leandrawitchwood.com, for news, information, and more episodes.
I'm Elyse Wells, and I can be found at Seeking Numina on YouTube, Instagram, and Facebook, and seekingnumina.com. That's Seeking, Numina.